Okay, we're talking about complex movements today. Complex movements is something the brain has to think about. Now, any movement we can do in life, we can add complexity to it. Sometimes it can be complexity that's not really needed, but in regards to changing the physical shape of the body, people have often heard of the mind to muscle connection. So for instance, doing a bicep curl, we can really activate, and you need a good concentration of the mind to muscle connection. But is that movement a complex movement? What do we have to think about? We have to think about the feeling and maybe the time or attention of the tempo training. Now, a complex movement is a little bit more of a thought process, or the complexity of the movement is a little bit harder. So it's not going to be an isolation movement. You know, a bicep curl is complex in its nature, but that compared to a power clean, for instance, there's so many more things going on. So when people talk about training, they tend to talk about training the body, and that's a great thing as well, but the body and the mind have to work together. So I like to not make things complicated or unnecessarily complicated, but if you add a complex movement to that, it's working on that brain focus. Okay, so there's a series of movements you have to perform from a clean, and it could be a clean into an overhead press. So you have to think about your timing. You have to think about your body's position. You have to feel, be aware of it. You have to breathe. You have to brace. The body's thinking about the next component of that movement, the cats, the timing, the rhythm. There's so many movements to do that. So you can't just do a training session or a complex movement and think, oh, what have you left on for dinner in the house? You have to be in that moment. You have to be really focused. And that way you're training the mind and the body. And there's actually a lot of good research stating that complex training, making a movement pattern, not more difficult, but doing something that takes a lot of focus can actually really help with slowing down risk of possible Alzheimer's and degenerative brain problems we can have in a later stage of life as well. If you keep the mind sharp, if you keep reading, if you keep using the brain like a muscle fiber, you will help with that whole mind and body connection as well. So if you're not doing complex movements, and again, just take it a very slow movement. We need to be learning a certain skill. Now, complex, there's a skill component to that, but the only way you can become better skilled at a complex movement is by doing it again and again and again. Any great lifter you will see will make a very complex movement look very easy, but it doesn't mean that their mind has got used to that. They still have to focus on each of those different movement patterns as well. So if you have complex movement patterns in your training program, and it doesn't have to be in every single session, but you should be having complex movements. Olympic lifting is a great thing. There's a complex movement could be a series of movements with a kettlebell, i.e. a swing, a high pull, a snatch, a lunge, okay? Something where you're focusing on the rhythm, the time and the technique, the mind and muscle connection, the breathing, the bracing. All these are such a huge component to better movement patterns. And when you do a complex movement in the training gym, your body will tend to move a little bit better throughout the day, throughout the days, because it's more skilled, it's more aware of its spatial awareness as well. So we could go into a whole lot of information about the complex movements we do. So if that's something you want to see, just let us know. Hopefully that helps. Thanks, folks.